Good evening. My name is Tylluan. I'm a solitary pagan witch, an author and the founder of the Wolf and Howl Press. And this evening's little talk, in fact it feels more like tonight, but it's just coming up to 8 o'clock now. This evening's little talk is about witches and power. The whole idea of power. What do we do with it? What are we supposed to do? How much should we have? And the thing about power is that there are two ways of looking at it. There are people who cannot get enough of it and who want to pretend they have an awful lot more power than they really do. And there are people who feel that having power is somehow something they'd rather not possess at all. Now, as always, I would suggest there has to be a middle way. There has to be a route of having power, knowing how to handle it, knowing how much we can handle, because that's important too, and knowing what to do with it. You see, the thing is, no matter how powerless we feel, every one of us has power to some extent in the physical world. We all have power over something usually lesser than ourselves in some shape or form. For example, we might see an ant crawling on the floor nearby. Now we have the power to let it go, let it get on with whatever it's doing, or squash it. That's our power. What we choose to do, well, there are a lot of variables, but by and large, I would hope most of us would say, well, we'll let it go for tonight, shall we? Right, okay. We have power over people who are weaker than us in some shape or form. We have teachers who have power over their pupils. Maybe not collectively these days, but individually. We have soldiers who have power over civilians. We have politicians who like to think they have power over everybody. All these things are almost in stages, in layers, and it puts us back in mind of the old-fashioned feudal system that was in Europe, where you had the very, very wealthy barons sort of just over halfway up, and you had the king at the top, and then everybody else was all squashed down the bottom. Our power is something that we possess, and it can define us. Now, what I mean by that is that the type of power we go for, the type of power that attracts us, and how we use that power are all very important. They're all interlinked, but they're not exactly the same. First of all, we have to ask ourselves, when we sort of identify what power we have and which groups of people we have power over, well, if you're doing magic, you're hoping you have power over the subject of your spell. Okay, that's one thing. The next question you have to ask yourself is that power going to do that person, that other person, any good? Is it going to do them any harm? Is it going to do me any good or any harm? And what about all the people on the edge of the circle, if you like? I mean, never mind casting a circle now, but on the edge, the periphery of this world, how is it going to affect them? These are important things to think about, because it's not the possession of power, I don't think. It's not the possession of power that causes the problems. It's what we do with it, and how far we come down on one side or the other. If we have power and we choose to do nothing but harmful acts with it, well, that is very soon going to become a bad thing. And if we have power and we try to do nothing but good with it, well, technically you could say that must be a good thing. But of course, power being what it is, it's a slippery beast. You might think you're going to do good with something and end up doing a great deal of harm with it. So these are all things that we have to think about. So when I talk about witches and power, it really applies to anybody in any walk of life anyway. What sort of power do we have? What are we going to do with it? How far do we want to pursue that power? How important is it to us? You know, we're in the week this week when I'm recording this. We're in the week where we are remembering the outbreak of World War I, the Great War, the war to end all wars. Now, war is a perfect example of power. Power gone to extremes, if you like. The power to declare war. Does it do any good? Well, maybe sometimes it does, but if it did good, if it achieved its aims, how is it that we have to have so many wars? I mean, you look at something like the 18th century, there was barely a year went by without a war in Europe. And if you look at the 20th century, hardly a year has gone by without a war where someone in Europe is involved in it. And then we have to say to ourselves, well, is this necessarily the very best use of power? And I'm only using war as an example. You could use lots of different ideas for it. But it's a very graphic example. And it's in the news at the moment and people think about it and all that. And I think it's a good example because it is such an extreme one. Now, if we go back to our own lives, you know, is what we're intending to do in the use of our power, is that really the very best way we can use our power? For example, you want to get rid of a spider. I am surrounded by spiders at the moment. They're all around the place. They're following me. And I am getting rather paranoid about it. But is the answer to go around with some sort of anti-spider spray? I don't even know if they sell these things. I'm just using it. Is that the answer, to go and spray everything? Is it to find some way to remove the spider or get somebody to take the spider and put it in a place where it's not going to bother me? Is the answer to try and live alongside the spider, which you can do sometimes, but not always if it happens to be living somewhere that I need access to on a regular basis? You know, we have to think of all these things. And this little example, war on the one extreme, spiders on the other, they encapsulate what I'm trying to say. You cannot be a witch in a vacuum. Everything we do is informed by what we believe, what we think. And I'm going to come on to that in another video, the one after this, I hope, where we start talking about, well, what do witches do? But for the time being, anyway, what I'd like to do is to just think, to send you away with some ideas, you know. What is power? How much power do I want? How far am I prepared to use that power? How far am I prepared to take responsibility for using or not using that power? What if I have the power to prevent a great evil and I don't use it? You know, it's not just a case of, oh, power is evil. No, power's not evil. It's what we do with things. It's how we use them. It goes back to the old idea of magical intentions. Not white witches and black witches. It's back to the idea of intentions. What do we do? It's the same thing with power. And these are questions that really need us to answer them. And we are the only ones who can answer them. Nobody else can answer them for us. Because if they do, then they're going to be telling us what we ought to be doing. And we don't want that. We want to be getting away from that. Especially if we're solitaries, we've got to walk our own path. You can't suddenly say, well, I'm walking my own path as far as this, and now I need somebody to come in and tell me what to do. Because if you're doing that, you're really lying to yourself. You can't. I'm sorry about the snoring and sighing going on down there. You can't. You have to take responsibilities, and it's a very hard thing to do sometimes. Sometimes, you know, I know with me, sometimes I've made a right royal mess of it. And I just have to take responsibility and say, yeah, that was me, sorry. Try and make amends for that one. But it's better still to think ahead and try and avoid these things. So, as always, I hope I've sent you away with a few ideas of your own, a few things to think about. And, you know, obviously don't sweat it, but just give it a little thought from time to time and see where it takes you. And thank you very much for listening. Thank you. Goodbye.